This is a recording of the Kansas City Secular AA Speaker Meeting held every Saturday night at 7 o'clock p.m. at HJ's Youth and Community Center, 6425 Warnell Road, Kansas City, Missouri. This is episode 15, and our speaker is Cass K.
Welcome to the Secular Speaker Meeting. I'm Simon, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Simon.
Our secular group attempts to maintain a tradition of free expression and to conduct a meeting where all may feel free to express any doubts or disbeliefs they may have, and to share their own personal form of spiritual experience, their search for it, or the rejection of it. In keeping with AA tradition, we do not endorse or oppose any form of religion or atheism. Our only wish is to help those who want recovery without having to accept anyone else's beliefs or having to deny their own. During the meeting, pass around the basket if you'd like to contribute to coffee and rent the podcast. On that note, we don't recognize you. We do make this meeting a podcast, so we'll pass around a microphone. If you don't want to be included in that, there's an off switch on the microphone. You can just pass the microphone. You can tell me afterwards, and I'll edit it out of the podcast. But if you're comfortable, say whatever you'd like. Some of us will introduce ourselves as alcoholics. That's not necessary. This is an open meeting, so anybody who would like to attend is more than welcome. You can check out all the past podcasts at secularaaspeaker.org. And, we'll start off with Cass here. Tell a bit about, whatever Cass would like to tell about themselves. And afterwards, like I said, we'll pass around the mic. We'll have a discussion. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've heard, ask questions, you could do that then. Or if you've got something on your mind that you'd like to say to the group or get off your chest or open up for conversation, you can do that then as well. Without further ado, Cass.
I'm Cass. I'm an alcoholic. So I've been in the program for a little over 2 years now, and I've never been the speaker at a speaker meeting, so I'm excited to do this. I just wanted to say thanks to those who have been putting this together. I think it's really cool to have something accessible online for people that maybe don't have access to AA or secular AA, or maybe don't feel comfortable going to meetings yet or whatever, or just don't have time, and it's really awesome. So thanks for doing that. I was kind of thinking through, what I wanted to say, and what I was kind of trying to think about was what maybe led me to be an alcoholic. And there's lots of things, but so my dad is in the program. He's been sober for about 13 years now, which is really awesome. But when I found out, I didn't really know that he was an alcoholic or even drinking a lot when I was young. He hid it a lot, or I didn't notice. But when it came out, my parents got divorced and he quit afterwards, and that's when he stopped. And at that point, I had decided that I was probably going to be an alcoholic. And I was like 13 at the time, I think. And the only reason I think I thought that at the time was because I had heard that it could be hereditary, and I guess I assumed that if someone in your immediate family has it, then you're just doomed. Which it ended up being true for me. But at the beginning, I just decided, I was into the whole dare thing, and I decided that I wouldn't ever drink, or at least I wouldn't drink a lot ever. But so when I'm looking back from as long as I can really remember, I always had the feeling of being an outcast or a weirdo. And I always had this feeling that other people had more of an ability to connect with others than I did. And that's still a feeling that I deal with today, but as I've gotten older, I've learned that can often be an illusion that other people are doing better or whatever, but I also still find things now that seem to prove it to be true to me, but that's definitely something that I'm still working on. On top of feeling like an outcast, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression at a young age. I went to therapy a lot when around the time that my parents got divorced, they started sending us to therapy. And I realized I had a lot of habits of wanting to escape from reality in a lot of ways. I used things like the internet and, just reading, going in nature, anything really that I could find that would keep me busy and keep me out of my own head and my thoughts. In elementary school, as young as that. And then I had some things written down. I just have to look at them real quick for those listening. So I'm a creative, I'm an artist, and I think that one of the reasons I've been compelled to do that is my discomfort or displeasure with reality, and I think that creating something is a way for me to kind of just make things my own way and make my own reality in a way. And it helps me, I think, embrace what we do have to live with in life. So when I was 14, on top of this, I was always kind of the goody two-shoes, rule follower, teacher's pet. But I also always had this rebel side to me, and both of those things are still kind of true for me now. But when I was 14, I had this best friend that had been smoking marijuana since 7th grade, and had been suggesting me to try it, all this stuff, and I decided to try it, and I really just wanted to. So there was this smoking weed at that time felt like this secretive kind of act of camaraderie that would bring us together. We'd be experiencing something together that not a lot of people, especially in my school and my grade, were doing. We were kind of we were a gang. We're different. And even though I didn't really enjoy it that much, and I felt kind of uncomfortable, it felt really good to have this thing that connected us without me having to do anything other than smoke. But I didn't feel like I had to prove myself a little bit, and that's happened more and more, I found, as I got older. So in high school, I did well, and I did well in school, and so that's kind of getting away from. Hang on one sec. Okay, so then I hung out with these people, and it felt good to be a part of that. And this friend also had access to Adderall. She was prescribed to it, and she introduced that to me as a study aid. And so I was really starting to see what mind-altering substances were like. And it definitely was something that caught my attention. At this point in high school, I just was always wrestling more and more with reality and with being alone and quiet with myself where my thoughts could come forward. I was spending all night on the internet, a lot of times watching these horrible videos that you shouldn't have access to, but you do. And this is even embarrassing for me to share, but I feel like it was important part of my development. I was watching videos of people getting hurt, people dying, every night. And sometimes I got to the point where I was so uncomfortable with myself that I would watch these until the sun came up because I couldn't sleep. I didn't feel comfortable. And then I finally would sleep when the sun came up. And I think that I was attracted to these movies or these videos and stuff because initially they made me feel something. Eventually I got really desensitized to it. But it was distracting me from what was inside my head, so I kept doing it. And I was I was on the internet talking to strangers on those like Omegle websites, and sometimes in a sexual manner when I was a minor. And I just think, and these were like the early ways that I was participating in, I think, addictive behavior and unhealthy behavior for sure. And then so at age 17, when I was a junior in high school, my same friends that, had introduced me to weed and everything, set me up on a blind date for my prom with this guy who had never been to his prom. He was 21 years old, and it wasn't in high school anymore. And I didn't know him before. And he drank a lot. He did cocaine with his friends. So I got kind of infatuated with him, and I started spending, after that, during that summer, I started spending a lot of time with him. And at some point in here, I can't really remember, I had started drinking. Somehow I just kind of had gave up on the fact. I thought it would be okay. Maybe it was because other people were doing it. I don't know, but that started happening, and I got drunk for the first time playing beer pong with Miller Lite in my basement at a house party that we were putting on. And yeah, I had kind of two parts of me. Like, I was connecting with these people that were really not good influences, but I was also still a good student, and I was, I don't know, this model student kind of person, So in the house parties, when my parents got divorced, I think, so they thought that me and my brother were pretty good kids, and we were pretty good kids, but I think that they thought that meant that they didn't have to keep an eye on us very much, and I think they also were kind of trying to be the cool parent, I think they were both worried about losing our affection and everything. And so my mom traveled a lot for work and stuff, and when she was gone, my brother and I, and this was another way that I was connecting with people, because when my brother and I were young, we were really close. We were really good friends, and then he got older and he started to get cool and hung out with his friends and wouldn't hang out with me. So he and I, once we started having these house parties at our house, I felt this it was so cool. I was connecting with him, and I had all these people that liked me because we were providing a place for them to party, of course. But that was a big source of friendship and happiness in my eyes. And that, so that we just started doing that more and more. And so another part of this is, when I was younger, I was raised Catholic, and I always kind of had this idea of keeping my virginity until marriage. And then as I got older, I was like, well, okay, I'll keep it for someone that's special. And like a bunch of other things, I just gradually started to say fuck it about a lot of stuff. And I got to this point where I didn't care about it anymore. And once I broke the seal on that, it started happening in quick succession with a lot of people. And I found that in AA, not a lot of people really talk about sex very much, but I do think that it can be very important. And for me, it is very important. And I, in relation to my addictive behavior as well, when I was 18 or 19, I started to become concerned that I was a sex addict, actually. But I thought, I recognized that I could still control it, even though it was affecting my life negatively in a lot of ways. But then that was another source of acceptance that I felt from other people, this male attention that made me feel cool and beautiful and interesting or whatever, like, even though I would feel really bad afterwards sometimes, or disappointed that after they like got what they wanted from me, then I didn't matter to them anymore. And so that was like the summer after high school and going into college. And by the time I got to college, I left Kansas City and went to Colorado. It was clear to me that I was an alcoholic at that point. So from the summer of 2010 to the fall of 2011, which is like a little over a year, I had already gotten to the point where I was drinking alcoholically, I think. And granted, I was underage, so it was kind of difficult to get alcohol. But when I did, I drank as much as I could. And in the dorms in my freshman year, me and my roommate, we were the ones that were drinking the most out of anybody. And I thought that was cool. Like, we had this thing, like it was just, it always felt like an easy in with people, like an automatic acceptance and connection with people that didn't depend on who I was or how I acted. Like especially like when it was hard to get or when we were sneaking around, like it always felt like just this connection between us. So freshman year of college, I was gone from the house, that my parents were in another state. I could do whatever I want. And that, so I had drinking, irresponsible sex. And then like I was still doing fine at school because I'm smart, I happen to be intelligent, I think, and I happen to be good at school at least. So that was something that even early on, I felt like I was functioning, regardless of what I was doing otherwise, like I was still on top of things. And so sophomore year of college, there was a very significant event in my life. For those of you who don't know me or those that are listening, I am trans and I was female identified at birth. So up until this point, I was this cute little girl, woman, whatever, that was trying to be feminine, trying to be okay with that, trying to fit in as one of the girls, which never worked very well. And I think that probably contributed to part of the reason that I always felt out of place and weird and like just not comfortable with myself. But growing up where I did, I never knew. I mean, I barely had any exposure to gay people or lesbians. There was none in my school. There was like one gay boy. But no trans people at all. I had no idea. My idea of transgender people was you had to switch 100% from one to the other. And I'll get more into that later, but so I had been, trying to be feminine. I had, for the past 2 years before this, I had been growing out my hair. It was really long, and when I was younger, I kind of had shorter hair, and I had gotten tired of that, so I decided to cut it again, really, really short. And it's significant because there was one night I was talking to one of my friends that I had made on the internet, because I was still doing that too, and I was like, I could probably like dress up like a boy right now and I would look like one, like ha ha ha. And I did that. And it's funny because that's something that I had done many times in the past. And for some reason this time, it hit me that something about that felt too right, and I had to figure out what it was. And I think that I was open to figuring this out about myself because I was in a space at this time where I felt safer to be myself. Because if I had realized I was trans when I was still in high school in Kansas, I don't think that I would have done very well with that. And so now, on top of like all of these other problems that I felt like I was dealing with, I also was trans, and I had to do that. And also in regards to what I said before, about switching 100% one to the other, I realized not only was I trans, but I researched a bunch, and I found the first word I found was bigender, which meant that you had some amount of female and male energy, whatever. It's not really a commonly used word anymore. But then I found genderqueer, which really felt more in line with me. And basically, what I am at this point, where I am at this point, is that I'm not on the gender binary. I'm somewhere in there. I don't know. I'm just myself, and I do whatever I want. But at the time, and that was my decision when I transitioned, is I'm going to do whatever makes me happy, regardless of what other people think. And that was a huge turning point in my life, because it wasn't only expressing myself in line with my gender, but also in a lot of other ways, and just embracing myself. So even though I was really scared that I was going to have to be going through this and have people not understand and maybe lose friends, which happened, and have to tell my family and not know how that would go, I was really, really excited to be myself and to learn about myself. And so it was great. I mean, it was so scary, but it was like, it was huge. So for the next 3 years of college, 2.5 years, I was still drinking a lot, but everything was fine, went pretty smoothly. I came out to my parents, and everything was great with that eventually. It was maybe a little rocky at first, but started testosterone, things were good. And then when I graduated, I got a BFA in drawing. I had been in school for 17 years straight through, I had been good at school. It was a thing that I enjoyed, but now I was done. I had a job at Jimmy John's, a part-time job. And I was getting money quarterly from a family business that I have stock in. And so I didn't really have any responsibilities. I could do whatever I wanted. And I kind of decided that I would take like a year off of any big plans or anything, because I had been doing school for so long, and I thought, I deserved a break. And so for that next year after college, my life really became working at Jimmy John's, drinking, going to bars, going to friends' house and drinking, going to music shows and drinking, and doing other drugs that I had started to get into, and that was it. I mean, I don't really remember how I fed myself. Like, I think that I just ate out all the time. I didn't know how to cook. I mean, that year really went by with nothing. I just did nothing except for go kind of downhill on the alcoholism, especially. And by the end of that year, I had totally forgotten what I was doing, and I was stuck in this rut without even knowing it, really. And then I met this guy that, like, I immediately fell deeply in love with, and he introduced me to Molly and cocaine, and he had consistent access to that. And we both kind of immediately connected and felt very strongly for each other, and we felt kind of like invincible when we were with each other. And I think that, we were doing cocaine and Molly and drinking all the time, and I think that a lot of what we were feeling was kind of drug fueled. Like, we felt like we were going to become famous and like conquer the world kind of thing, And so that second year after college, even more and even quicker went down, and I really started to feel out of control, but I was kind of like okay with it because I was high or drunk so much. But I started to realize, like, okay, this is a problem. Like, I remember one time I was on antibiotics, so I had to stop drinking for 7 days. And then I continued 3 days after that, and I stopped for 10 days, and I was like, and that was a huge accomplishment. And then I got really drunk the next day because I had done so well for 10 days. And then there had been a number of times in my life so far that I should have gotten a DUI. There was times that I ran my car into the curb and popped my wheel. There was a time that I was stopped by a cop and he told me, this is crazy, but he told me that I was probably too inebriated to drive, but didn't give me a DUI. I don't know how that happened, honestly. But there was one night where we were me and this guy were going home from a show at like 4 a.m. and we were racing. We each had our cars and racing at like 65 miles in a 45. And we got to his neighborhood and he turned in and I went after, and my car didn't stop in time and it skidded into a fire hydrant, and I hit it really hard. I think I was probably going 30 or 40 still, and totaled my car, and later found out that I got a minor traumatic brain injury, and I was really drunk and really high on coke that night. So the next morning, I called the insurance and found a way to and the cops didn't catch me again this time, but I called the insurance and found a way to get that taken care of, and had like a 7-hour panic attack, and then a 3 days where I just stayed at this guy's house and slept basically, because probably because I had a major concussion. And then I went to the doctor and they prescribed me Xanax because I couldn't sleep. And I had never done Xanax before, but they thought that was a good idea. Yeah. And so for like a month, I quit working because I didn't have a car anymore, and I was driving. A delivery driver is my job, so I didn't have that. So for a month, I just kind of was concussed and still drinking a little bit, but not as much, which was a bad idea because I didn't realize at the time I had a brain injury. But then the month was up, my Xanax ran out, and they gave that to me because I couldn't sleep. And then I couldn't suddenly sleep again. It was still a problem. And it was Thanksgiving, and I drank at Thanksgiving and did coke that weekend. And then the Monday after, I had kind of like hit a breaking point where I didn't feel in control anymore. I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was worried about taking a combination of drugs so that I could sleep that would inadvertently kill myself. So I, what's the word? Signed myself into a psych ward for a 72-hour hold. And that was like some of the most traumatic time of my life right there. I was there for 48 hours and I left early, but as soon as I got out, so my dad came from Kansas when this happened, because I for some reason didn't sign the HIPAA so that my parents could be notified what was going on with me at all. They would only be notified that I was there. But I was really crazy at this time, so I didn't want them to know something. So he came worried, and my parents were suddenly in the same room as each other for the first time in 5 years. So that was crazy. And for that to happen had to be a really, really dire consequence for me. But it was like, yeah, it was a relief though, because now things were in the open, because for a year or two before that, I had been realizing that I had a problem and wanting to stop or get help, but it wasn't at the point where I felt like I was really out of control yet. And I think that there was many times, I think there was things that should have caught my attention, but it had to be this really big thing that could have been worse also. It was pretty bad, but it could have been a lot worse, to finally get it in the open, make it so that I couldn't easily go back into drinking quietly without people knowing. And so my parents and I found a rehab for me to go to, and I went to that. And I'm incredibly grateful to be to have had the opportunity to go to a rehabilitation center, because even with everything that had happened, I was still really unsure about if I was an alcoholic, even though I had admitted it to myself many times. And even if I was an alcoholic, I didn't know if I really needed to stop or if I was ready to stop drinking. And I ended up extending my stay to 45 days, which is really good, because I think if I hadn't had this incredible support and people that were taking care of me, I was in this incredibly vulnerable state where I was, first of all, going crazy for the first 2 weeks. I was like psychotic, drug-induced psychosis, I think is what it's called. And then I kind of like reverted into some childhood stuff while I was there. And then I started to get into my addiction, and yeah, I couldn't have done it without that environment. And even when I left after all that, I still was like, I don't know, I can probably drink again at some point. Like, but for now, it's probably a good idea if I don't. So, so I came home, and I didn't have a job, I didn't have a car or any money. I was in debt now, not too much, but I was in debt. And I had run out of all of the support that I was going to get from my friends and family, because they recognized at this point, like, it was time for me to step up and take care of myself. And so, like, the first 4 months of being home were really horrible, honestly. They were depressing and scary. But as soon as I got back, I started going to AA every day, at least once. I got into CDIOP, so I still had some therapy that was supporting me through that. And I still felt really unsure about my ability to quit drinking, but I didn't drink, though. I mean, there were so many times that I wanted to, but I would just wait. I would just, sleep, especially at night. It would happen, but I would just sleep and wait until the next day, and I would go to AA first thing in the morning, and just kept waiting and waiting, and eventually got better. When I was first in AA, there was a lot of there wasn't any agnostic AA where I was, so there was a lot of God stuff, and it wasn't like I wasn't incredibly averse to it, but wasn't really my thing. But I tried to just get as much out of it as I could and put it into my own kind of words or whatever. It kind of got to a point where I actually felt like I didn't want to go to AA anymore, because I felt like I was still in this really vulnerable state, and I felt very influenceable. And it worried me to be around so many people that are at where I was. They were kind of like suggesting a lot of things. And I didn't want to pick up on someone else's opinions or habits just because they said it. I wanted to make sure that I was doing it my own way. So I wouldn't maybe necessarily suggest it, but I stopped going for a couple months. But I still, if I felt like I was having a really bad day or anything, I would still go, even if it wasn't ideal, And so, when I moved, so I was still in Colorado, and once I got sober, I suddenly remembered what I had promised myself like 2 years before that I was going to take a break from stuff and then start doing things. And I was like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. So I decided one of my goals is to move around to places, and I thought that starting back home somewhere where I have family, I wanted to spend a lot more time with family, and and where I had support would be a good starting place to go to a bunch of other places. And I recognized that when I moved, I would have to start going to AA again at the very beginning, especially every day, because I'd be living alone for the first time in a new city. And yeah, just those two things are huge. So I did start going to AA every day, and I found these agnostic groups, which have been awesome. And I felt connected to them a lot more than other groups that I've been to. And yeah, it's been great coming still. And some of the main things that I have learned from AA is, one is everyone's journey is different. I mean, we hear so many stories in here, and for me, that means that I can't compare myself to other people. I still have a really hard time with that. But I really just have to, I love to listen to people and hear how things have been for them, but I have to remember that my life is my own, you know. Another thing that I learned is it's way easier than I expected to quit drinking, and especially easier to not drink, continue to not drink after like the 6 month or 1 year mark. Even though I went through some really hard times, what I've gotten out of it has been so much better than what I felt was a really good life before when I was drinking. I felt like it was like I couldn't imagine anything else, you know? And even though change kind of feels a lot slower now, the changes that are happening create so much more than I thought that my drunk self was creating. I felt like I was creating a lot, but I wasn't. And then a huge thing that I've learned from AA and from rehab is just the how important gratitude is. And I mean, I'm so grateful for so many things that have happened to me, and that I didn't die so many times that I could have. And I've always kind of been pretty connected to gratitude, but now, when I'm feeling really bad in any way, even when I feel like it feels silly and dumb to do it, if I go through a list in my head of things that I'm grateful for and like do it honestly, I always feel better afterwards. You know, I realize that my problems really aren't that bad, and that I have a really good life, and there's lots that I'm grateful for. So that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I'm glad to see everybody here tonight.
Thank you, Cass. I feel really lucky that we got you on your first stop on your journey. I don't know. I've had a lot of fun getting to know you and been a good friend. Thanks for doing the meeting. Also, I learned a lot about you that I didn't know. And I'm gonna pass the microphone around and the basket maybe the other direction. Would you like to start us off, Greg?
I'm Greg, and I'm an alcoholic. And I really enjoyed hearing your story. I've heard pieces of it, but when I first met you, I was really pleased. I wasn't sure that you were trans, but I was glad when you mentioned it, and it didn't take too long for you to mention it. And so I know that takes a lot of bravery, just to face the world when you're going through these things. And so I already knew you were a brave kid. So. But since then, you've stepped up and you've taken meetings and leadership and just it seemed, I know it wasn't easy, but it seemed easy. But again, I think that's probably the bravery that's pushing you into that. And I feel the way, too, for people that have done that. And we have a great group of people, and you really impressed me. And I'm pleased you're with us. And I'll pass it on.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm an alcoholic. Cass, I think you led the first meeting I went to. So, and I came back. But yeah, I remember you being really welcoming and having a good subject and everything like that. Like I felt like everyone was welcoming, but you stood out to me. So it was great to hear your story tonight. And I personally really appreciate that you brought up. I don't know how to describe this because we don't talk about it in meetings ever, but like sex and alcohol, like that's a really big part of my story, and I wish it wasn't, but yeah, if you ever want to talk about it, I can talk about it. So thank you.
I'm Kana, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank you for sharing your story. It was really great to hear it and hear all the things that you went through, and kind of how you got here. I remember my first meeting. You were there, and like I've told you this before, but like you told me after the meeting that I should come back to the one on Thursday. And I was thinking I would just go once in a while, but I think it's because of you that I've gotten so involved in this group, and I thank you for that very much. So with that, I'll pass.
I'm Emily. I'm an alcoholic. Well, I've never met you, but I really enjoyed hearing your story and actually related to a lot of it, especially kind of like, touching on like learning about the internet at a young age and kind of stumbling upon really awful things and just sticking to it. So I thought it was cool you mentioned that. And then also just sort of spiraling really bad after college. I had a really similar experience, though, my alcoholism and drug addiction started much before that, but it just got so bad. And I was also working at Jimmy John's, so so there's that. But yeah, thanks for sharing.
I'm Stacy. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I thought about that Jimmy John's connection. I've never met you either, Cass, but thank you for sharing your story. I'm grateful to be at a different meeting, and happy to support any meetings that are welcoming and make people feel comfortable in whatever aspect of the program that they want to latch onto and whatever helps them, So, I really appreciate your story, and I just think it's important to share, and I also related a lot to it. Obviously, I'm an alcoholic, so I relate to that aspect. But I have a dual diagnosis. I'm a queer person and have alcoholic parents. So it was great to hear, and mostly just happy for you to be out here telling your story and to be influencing other people. So congratulations.
Did you have anything else you'd like to add, Cass? All right, that's a wrap.